Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Mate. Thanks so much for being here. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content. On today's show, we'll be featuring two guests. Quinn Slobodian, author of Crack Up Capitalism, Market Radicals, and the Dream of a World Without Democracy, will join us to talk about the Broligarchy and how things are going under co-president Elon Musk. And we'll hear from Michael Tracey, Useful Idiots fan favorite, one of my favorite journalists. He'll be talking about his impression of the Trump administration so far. And is Donald Trump living up to his campaign promises of America first? And what's up with Donald Trump promising to own Gaza after not mentioning that as part of his campaign pledge? And we'll also hear Michael's thoughts on the Ukraine war, which Trump is talking about ending, but knowing Donald Trump, it's hard to expect him to follow through. So we'll talk about that and a whole lot more on today's show.
And make sure you become subscribers if you're not already at usefulidiotspodcast.com, where you get great extra content like a weekly Thursday Throwdown, your midweek dose of media madness, where we react to cable news clips. And you also get extended interviews, which you definitely don't want to deprive yourselves of. Give yourself that gift. Alrighty, should we get started with the four basic food groups? What do we got for Democrats suck, Aaron?
For Democrats suck, let's check in on how Democrats are resisting the aforementioned Broligarchy, our government under the control of co-president Elon Musk. Jerry Connolly is the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. He was picked for that position over AOC, who represents sort of the younger, more progressive wing of the party. And Democrats decided, you know what? We're not ready for that yet. Let's bring in Jerry Connolly, career elderly Democrat, to manage our oversight of the Trump administration. And here's Jerry Connolly commenting on calls to have oversight over what Elon Musk is doing in cutting government agencies, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And Jerry Connolly coming to terms with the fact that Republicans, much to his surprise apparently, aren't willing to join Democrats in overseeing and cracking down on Elon Musk.
My motion to subpoena him, I thought, would have some broader support on the Republican side. It had none. You mentioned that they squashed it, but they had a scramble. They were collecting people and running into that hearing room, and they were able to table the motion on a one vote majority, 20-19. But the entire tenor and topic of the hearing shifted to Elon Musk, didn't it? So we achieved our goal.
So Jerry Connolly's surprised that no Republicans would join him in subpoenaing Elon Musk, who basically is running the government along with the Trump administration. And if he thinks the Republicans are going to be up for serious oversight of Elon Musk, then he's in for more surprises, because so far Elon Musk is basically running wild. And the Democratic leadership has also been surprised and in fact upset that their own constituents are calling on them to do more. So this is a story that was in Axios about how Democrats are not pleased with being told what to do and how to do their jobs by their constituents. Scoop: Democrats pissed at liberal groups Move On and Divisible. A closed-door meeting for House Democrats this week included a gripe fest directed at liberal grassroots organizations. Members of the Steering and Policy Committee, with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries in the room, complained activist groups like Move On and Indivisible have facilitated thousands of phone calls to members' offices. People are pissed, a senior House Democrat who was at the meeting said of lawmakers' reaction to the calls. So basically, what this article is saying is that Hakeem Jeffries is very frustrated that liberal grassroots groups like Move On are calling on Democrats to do more to, stand up to Elon Musk cutting all these agencies, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And rather than heeding their constituents' calls, Hakeem Jeffries and other senior Democrats are complaining privately about it.
Wow, it must be so hard for them to be pushed to be accountable to their constituents.
Apparently it is. As a bonus Democrat suck, I want to turn to Ukraine, where Trump's policy, or at least Trump's statements so far, are just newly showing how bankrupt Democrats have been on the issue of Ukraine. So a lot has happened this week. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, announced that Ukraine basically will not join NATO. He also said that Ukraine's goal of seizing back all of its pre-2014 14 territory is unrealistic. And Trump then announced that he has spoken to Vladimir Putin and will immediately begin negotiations to end the war. Now, with Trump, you never know. He says things that are all over the map, including on Ukraine. On the one hand, he'll talk about how we have to have peace, but then he'll talk about imposing new sanctions and threatening Russia and continuing maybe even to arm Ukraine. Now, all while getting Ukraine to give up its natural resources to pay the U.S. back for all the money that it spent in Ukraine. But just the fact that Trump is speaking to Putin, that is a radical departure from Democratic policy, which basically refused to engage with Russia throughout this war. And in fact, as we've covered extensively, blocked multiple opportunities to end the war. So now Democrats are coming up with really toothless criticisms of Trump. So here, for example, is Matthew Miller, formerly known as Smirkula, the State Department spokesperson under Biden, responding to the Trump administration's opening up with Russia. So in response to Pete Hegseth ruling out NATO membership, Matthew Miller says they just surrendered one of the main points of leverage before negotiations even begin. Okay, and on the surface, that looks like a legitimate point, but the problem is everybody knows that this whole promise to Ukraine of NATO membership was just a bait and switch to try to bait Russia into war. That's been very clear now, because what did Joe Biden do? He also said that he's not ready to let Ukraine join NATO after he refused to take NATO off the table, which if he had just done that 3 years ago, that probably could have avoided the war. So Democrats are coming up with these really now empty criticisms of Trump for basically acknowledging reality. That's what they're basically mad at Trump for, that Ukraine's not going to join NATO, it's over, and this war needs to come to an end. And meanwhile, Trump is being honest about what the reality is, including that Ukraine is expendable and not an equal partner, contrary to what the Biden administration pretended. So here, for example, is Trump being asked if he sees Ukraine as an equal partner in peace talks with Russia.
Do you view Ukraine as an equal member of this peace process?
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace.
We will continue to be
I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
So there's Trump acknowledging that he doesn't see even Ukraine as an equal partner, which again, people might be offended by that, but that's also what the Biden administration thought too. Because if they didn't think that, then why did they keep blocking peace opportunities, including the peace deal that Ukraine reached back in April 2022 with Russian negotiators? So Trump is now actually just making plain what the actual policy is. He's just willing to admit it and willing to do more than Biden did, which was talking to Russia. And if he goes through with that, then we actually might see this war finally coming to an end. In a world where it seems like we're constantly being listened to by our phones, our computers, security systems, and Alexas, it sometimes feels pointless to even hope for privacy anymore. Amazon, Meta, and Apple are all using your data to sell you ads. But what if we told you something else was listening to you in a much more nefarious way, using your data to sell you to third parties and governments? You may have already guessed what it is: AI. Think about what we tell these AI platforms: our thoughts, dreams, sensitive questions, business ideas, and more. They take all this information, tie it to your identity, and then sell it. ChatGPT literally has the former director of the NSA sitting on their board right now. That's why we recommend Venice.ai. Venice.ai is a generative AI platform that is private and permissionless. Here's how they do it. They utilize leading open source AI models to deliver text, code, and image generation to your web browser. There's no downloads, no installations of anything. Messages are encrypted, and your conversation history is stored only in your browser. And check out their Pro plan, which gives you access to PDF uploads for summaries or insights, plus high image limits and limitless text. If you want to use AI without fear of handing over your most intimate thoughts to a corporation or the government, you can get 20% off a Pro plan using our link, venice.ai/useful, and code USEFUL. Click the link in the description to get started. What do we have for Republican Suck?
So for Republican Suck, I wanted to share a bunch of updates about the Trump administration and his plans as president So let's start with one exciting announcement that he made about a department that he wants to shut down completely very soon. Let's take a listen.
Oh, I'd like it to be closed immediately. Look, the Department of Education's a big con job. We're ranked, so they rank the top 40 countries in the world. We're ranked number 40th, but we're ranked number one in one department, cost per pupil. So we spend more per pupil than any other country in the world, but we're ranked number 40. We've been between 38 and 40. The last time I looked, it was 38. And then I looked 2 days ago, it came out the new list. It came out at number 40. So we're ranked 40. Norway, Denmark, Sweden. I hate to say it, China, as big as it is, it's ranked in the top 5. And that's a primary competitor. We're ranked number 40. So if we're ranked number 40, that means something's really wrong, right? And I say send it back to Iowa, to Idaho, to Colorado. Send it back to places that, and there are a lot of Indiana.
Okay, so a couple things here to in response to this. One is Trump is wrong about those numbers. So I think he's talking about this program for international student assessment, PISA. So they're not 40 as he claims. We're not coming in 40. What the real numbers are in science, the U.S. ranked 12 out of 37. In math, 28, so not doing great in math, and in reading, 6th. Now, what's fascinating here, though, is that he then cites other countries that are doing much better than the United States in education. He cites Scandinavian countries and China. And you know what those countries have? They have centralized departments of education. They don't send them back to states like he's proposing with Iowa and Indiana. Okay, so there's that. That's a serious thing that's happening. Another serious thing that's happening is that, and it's related to Trump's decision to try to slash the Department of Education. House Republicans have released their budget resolution, and they are aiming to cut Medicaid by at least $880 billion. And cut SNAP by at least 20%. SNAP, of course, is a food program for children who are food insecure. So they're just being, sadistic and sociopathic. And as we mentioned a few weeks ago, Trump's nominee for the OMB, who passed his confirmation process, he was using the language of woke weaponized government to go after SNAP, as Tim Kaine exposed him for doing. So this is the kind of things that they're going to be trying to do.
So this proposed budget from the Republicans, it's complicated. People are taking away from this that they're proposing a cut to Medicaid of $880 billion. That's not exactly quite what the text of their proposal says, but it is grounded in reality because basically what the Republican budget calls for is a budget cut of $880 billion by the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is what oversees Medicaid. And given how much money Medicaid costs, Medicaid would account for a lot of those cuts. So it's a fair assumption. So it's not exactly It's not exactly $880 billion to Medicaid, but that's likely what will be cut as a part of this overhaul because Republicans, their point here is they want to fund Trump's tax cuts, which in my opinion favor the ultra wealthy while still keeping up the same levels of spending on the Pentagon. In fact, maybe even increasing the Pentagon budget and also beefing up what's called border security. So yes, this Republican budget going after food assistance programs and certainly going after Medicaid. The exact amount we'll see, but what Republicans are saying is it's a lot of money that they want to cut, basically going after vulnerable people. And again, Trump on the campaign trail talked about he would not touch entitlements. He wouldn't touch Social Security. I believe he said the same thing about Medicaid too. And if this budget is reflective of his agenda, then he'd be violating his own campaign pledge.
Yeah, and as David Dayen of the American Prospect summarizes it, the $880 billion is presumably about Medicaid, and he says this is not a hard sell for Democrats to make. Republicans want to take food and medicine away from poor people and give that money to billionaires instead. And it's interesting because I don't know if you remember this, but I remember being shocked watching a Republican debate in 2016 and Trump coming out basically for some form of Medicare for all almost. I mean, he didn't call it that, but he basically was saying people needed to be insured. People need to have health care. They didn't deserve to be like on the streets without health care. And I remember saying, like, I think I tweeted like, wow, he just lost the primary because it was so far to the left of what any Republicans would say, and even some Democrats. But of course, he's no longer has that position.
Yeah, and now what does he say? Like, what did he say on the campaign trail this year? He said, we have the concepts of a new
concept of it,
plan, which of course he didn't detail. And I guess the concept now is cutting Medicaid. And Medicaid, its budget is about $600 billion a year. That's how much the federal government gives to the states for Medicaid. And so that's already less than what Republicans are calling to cut from that area of government. So it looks like to make that goal, to meet that target for Republicans, they're going to take a lot of money out of Medicaid. And how's that going to play in the midterm elections? Like, I don't think that's going to be very popular, especially if that goes into effect. And already it's underfunded. This is the scandal. Not only should we not be talking about cutting Medicaid, the only debate should be why aren't we funding it more? Because people struggle so hard in this medical system, and it doesn't match the costs of medical care. So to me, the debate should be how much more should we be funding it by, not how much should it be cut by.
Yeah, and we know why we're not funding more, right? Because of tax cuts and the military spending. Just two examples. But I also wanted to make another announcement about an exciting Trump policy shift, policy development. And I don't want to explain it. Let's just show a tweet by a pastor named Paula White. Okay. I have been appointed to lead the White House Faith Office. The office will work alongside Attorney General Pam Bondi to combat discrimination against Christians in federal institutions and ensure religious liberties are upheld across the country. Now, I want to just give people a sense of Paula White and her kind of her type of Christianity. She practices something called hard prosperity, which is, very much emphasizes that God rewards you materially for your good Christian deeds. And in fact, it's so controversial and so overtly materialistic that a lot of Christian right people find her to be a heretic. She is not shy about using God to influence politics. Let's take a look at this emergency prayer meeting she put together when she was trying to stop the steal.
We break and divide every demonic confederacy against the election, against America, against that who you have declared to be in the White House. We break it up in the name of Jesus. We lose confusion into every demonic confederacy directed right now at this election, directed specifically at the 6 states. We come against people that are working at high levels right now with demonic confederacies and secrecies and demonic plans and networks. We break it up and we command that it be exposed right now in the name of Jesus.
Okay, so unfortunately, that plan to go after demonic confederacies, which were stopping Trump from becoming president, this was in 2020, obviously, that didn't work. So somehow her prayers were not received by God. But last clip of her, I want people to get a sense of how motivational she is as a speaker. She really has quite the mastery of the spoken word. And even if she's not able to get God to do what she wants, it's still a great time listening to her. So let's take a listen.
For I hear victory, 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 victory in the corridors of heaven. In the corridors of heaven, victory, 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 victory. For angels are being released right now. Angels are being dispatched right now. Amanda aka ata raka teda baka sanda ata ambo osa kata rite eke banda ata rike didi ashata. For angels have even been dispatched from Africa right now. Africa right now. Africa right now. From Africa right now.
There, I think you get the sense of her. Very exciting that she's going to be taking such a part in an active role in the Trump administration. And a little piece of trivia about her. She's been married thrice, which I don't think is so good for people like her, like evangelicals. I don't think divorce is okay. But who am I to judge? She's been married 3 times, and her most recent husband is Jonathan Cain of Journey, the famous Don't Stop Believing band. Kind of coming full circle. She's not going to stop believing. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. At Useful Idiots, we are extremely proud to have an audience that really cares about helping the world, from bold activism to staying informed to supporting independent media. The support you give us and the brave guests we interview is invaluable. You are making a difference in the world. But when it comes to helping the world, our philosophy is that a healthy external life starts with a healthy internal one. Therapy can be helpful to anyone who tries it. You can learn positive coping skills, find new ways to set boundaries, improve relationships with green flags, or even just have someone to talk to. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. That's why we recommend BetterHelp. BetterHelp is fully online, which not only takes away the hassle of travel, but also eases the stress of taking this new step towards a better you. Over 5 million people worldwide use it. Why not you too? Access a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties to find the right person for you and easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/useful today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/useful. What do we got for Isn't That Weird?
For Isn't That Weird? Let's keep on with this theme of Trump administration cuts. The White House has been on a cutting spree. Elon Musk has been given, carte blanche to just cut what he wants. And reporters are finally asking, hey, what's your evidence that all these agencies that you're cutting have been engaged in fraud? And so this is the response from Carolyn Leavitt, the White House press secretary.
As for the actual receipts, we are happy to provide them, and I actually brought some today because all of you know I love to bring the receipts. We have contracts upon contracts that we can send and provide this information to you. Let me be very clear. We are not trying to hide anything. We have been incredibly transparent, and we will continue to be. These are screenshots of contracts that DOGE found across our government. This is a DEI contract, $36,000 for U.S. citizenship and immigration services. That is against the president's policies and his America First agenda. This is a $3.4 million contract, a Council for Inclusive Innovation at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Department of Commerce, another DEI contract that DOGE identified. I can continue to go through these. Oh, I love this one, $57,000 for climate change in Sri Lanka. What is this doing to continue the interests of the American people? Absolutely nothing.
Okay, so that's a policy argument if you think all these things aren't good policy, but it's not fraud.
Right.
You can't call that fraud just because you don't agree with what the contract is for.
Right.
You can say it's unnecessary if you don't believe in that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean they were elected, they have the right to cut things that they don't think are in the interest of the country. Okay, but it's not fraud to have a contract and have a screen receipts.
Really,
it's not a receipt to have a screenshot of a contract that was legally signed and has not entailed fraud. I mean, fraud is a serious charge.
Yes, and it's specific legal category. Yeah, I mean, you also obviously one could say, well, climate change is an issue that affects us all. But you're right, Aaron. Had she said that, she'd be, in my opinion, wrong about that issue, but grammatically not wrong, syntactically not wrong, or not grammatically, vocabularily not wrong.
And by the way, all this anti-DEI talk from the White House, okay, again, I think there's a legitimate place for criticism, obviously. In some cases, as we've talked about a lot on the show, diversity talk has been basically used by Democrats to avoid taking strong positions on class issues. So, okay, fine, there's a conversation there. But these people on the right who claim to be anti-woke, quote unquote, anti-DEI, what are they doing since taking office? Trump has already created a so-called task force against anti-Semitism and a new one now about anti-Christian bias inside the government.
Yeah, that's why that's what he's going to work on with Paula White.
This is so. It's while claiming
to speak for the Christians.
While claiming to oppose DEI, they're doing the exact same thing, except now with different groups that they're claiming to defend. In the case of anti-Semitism, that means basically cracking down on people who oppose genocide and even deporting them. So there's so much hypocrisy here and so much, fraud, and continuing the same policies just with different causes.
All right. So isn't that terrible? We have a truly terrible announcement from Trump about straws. But I'm going to surprise you about what's terrible about it. It's not really the actual straw-based policy. It's an outcome of it. And it's also a framing that he engages in, which is really problematic. So let's take a listen to this announcement.
We're going back to plastic straws. These things don't work. I've had them many times, and on occasion they break, they explode. If something's hot, they don't last very long, like a matter of minutes, sometimes a matter of seconds. It's a ridiculous situation. So we're going back to plastic straws. I think it's okay.
Wow. They explode.
And I don't think that plastic's going to affect a shark very much as they're munching their way through the ocean.
Trump has a shark interest. He's spoken about sharks before. But what I don't like about this, and why I think it's falls under a terrible, is because people know, viewers and listeners know my position on sharks. I'm not a shark supporter. I don't accept big sharkaganda. And Trump basically is once again, like so many other leaders in the world, whitewashing sharks. And by saying that this won't impact sharks, he's suggesting that sharks are good and that we should care about their well-being, which to me is terrible.
Well, and this is why we remain, I believe, the number one anti-shark podcast in the country. Yeah. So you can continue to count on us for all of your counter. What's the term for shark propaganda? Sharkaganda?
Sharkaganda, yeah.
Sharkaganda, yes.
Shark, yeah, big shark,
yes.
Yeah. Now, you could also argue, on a less important level, you could argue that more plastic pollution in oceans and more microplastics will be in our brains and bodies, even making its way into the bloodstream. And then they also add to landfills and cannot be recycled. So there's that terrible part of it. But the big one is the shark thing, obviously. So those are your 4 basic food groups.
So for today's interviews, we'll be speaking with 2 guests. Later on, we'll be hearing from independent journalist Michael Tracey. But first up, Quinn Slobodian.
We are very excited to be talking to Quinn Slobodian, who is professor of international history at the Frederick S. Pardee School of Global Studies in Boston University. His books, which have been translated into 10 languages, include most recently Crack Up Capitalism, Market Radicals, and the Dream of a World Without Democracy, and his forthcoming book, Hayek's Bastards, Race, Gold, IQ, and the Capitalism of the Far Right.
Quinn Slobodian, thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
You've been warning about the power of oligarchs for a long time. What is your impression so far of the oligarchs around Trump, especially Elon Musk, who have basically taken control of the government? Are you surprised by the extent to which they've been handed the reins of power and how far Elon Musk so far is going in basically cutting government programs and doing as he sees fit?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually pretty unusual for the ultra wealthy in the United States to kind of plunge directly into the dirty task of governance directly. I mean, for one thing, they usually get everything they need without doing so. So they don't actually have to, enter the halls of government and, load up the screens and try to mess with the code. If they intervene, usually they do so through sort of arm's length approaches, like corporate lobbying, campaign finance, being related in some way or another to people who are passing laws. So I have been surprised actually by the kind of hyper activist, like interventionist approach of someone like Elon Musk in particular in the last month, really. The fact that he's been handed the reins of power or sort of like given the access codes and given the lanyards and, the doors have been open for him, that maybe I'm not so surprised by. I think Trump is someone who respects money above all, and Elon Musk has more of it than anyone in the world. And so if he comes in and says, hey, I'm going to do the governance thing for you, you just have to step back and let me operate, then, Trump is also a lazy man by disposition. And so he's happy to kind of delegate that to someone who he, in his mind, sees as some genius investor, master operator of the marketplace. So I'm not surprised he's been allowed to do it. I've been a bit surprised that he's decided to take time out of his busy schedule to do something that he probably could have reaped most of the rewards from without getting his hands dirty.
And going after the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which relatively does not cost a lot of money, less than $1 billion to run the agency.
Yeah.
It saved consumers a lot of money by going
Yeah.
after corporations. What's going on there? Like, why would Elon Musk be so dead set so early on to cut an agency like that?
Well, I mean, there's obviously this very clear incentive for them to get involved, to sort of get in the way of regulations that might slow down the progress on what they see as their like civilization rescuing technologies. And as we know, self-driving cars crash a lot. There's a lot of reporting obligations. There's a lot of concern on the part of people like Musk that excessive oversight is going to kind of strangle, the cutting edge of innovation. So something like that makes perfect sense because, for someone who's trying to do big, bold, edge of the innovation frontier type rollouts, then there's going to be casualties along the way. And something like the Consumer Bureau was set up specifically to give voice to people who might be the casualties of these big new technologies. So getting rid of that right off the bat is like a pretty clear sort of project of like clearing the way for their own enterprises.
Can you talk about the connection between this PayPal mafia, the so-called PayPal mafia, the influence of South Africa, the shared South African background of many of these people who are part of this PayPal mafia?
Yeah, I mean, it's been remarked on many times, but it's still kind of crazy to remember that some of the core venture capitalists and tech founders who are doing this big push right now share a common thread, which is a childhood in South Africa. Peter Thiel was born in Germany, but grew up partially in South Africa and in what was then Southwest Africa, what's now Namibia. David Sachs, who was tapped to be the incoming AI and crypto czar for Trump, was also raised in South Africa. Elon Musk was definitely raised in South Africa all the way into his young adulthood. And, that obviously probably created for them a kind of a social link that I suppose they bonded over in the late 90s when they were first getting together to start their payments company. But it's been speculated, and I think there's some grounds to credit that the kind of militarized conflict environment of late apartheid and then post-apartheid South Africa, where communal groups kind of, band together, and for the white elite, they sort of guard themselves against what they see as the ravages of a socialist ANC government. This is a mentality of kind of fortress, individualism and kind of social Darwinism that someone like Musk has really leaned into. So it's kind of like the anti-Mandela approach, whatever the inverse of the rainbow republic is, that's kind of his vision of governance, I think.
And what about the things that Trump is doing right now vis-a-vis South Africa? How are those? Can you talk about those, and if they've been influenced by, you think, his connection to Elon?
That has been really striking, right? I mean, so Trump has come out publicly criticizing the treatment of white South Africans and offering effectively refugee status to white Afrikaners who feel like they need to flee the country because of land expropriation and sort of socialization projects. It's, one of those moments where the kind of subtext becomes text, where, refugee programs across the board are being vilified and, slashed left, right, and center. People who were made legal as refugees under Biden's administration are now having their residency revoked because they come from the wrong countries and their skin color is not white. And meanwhile, there's this sort of proactive push to advocate on behalf of this, really not very threatened or persecuted white minority, who even then loudly is, of course, saying that they don't want to go to America and that their homeland is the Boerveld or whatever. I actually don't know who sort of put that bug in the ear of Trump. I think that, Elon himself is very reactive to things that just show up in his social media feed. And, Visegrad 24, maybe you guys know more about that than I do, but they've been very hard on pushing kind of these ethno-nationalist claims. And this is often less Elon sort of saying things spontaneously as sort of reacting to things that he's seeing online and signal boosting people like this one account called Burr, which is frequently sort of celebrating this white only enclave called Orania, which was created some years ago in South Africa that, is openly racist and celebrates the kind of virtues of Caucasian industry against Black socialism. So that is one of the examples, I think, of not just kind of conservative or soft right-wing messages that are coming out of Musk's social media account and then being picked up in Trump's Truth Social account, but really like far right, properly extreme, openly racist nationalist positions. But that's been a startling development, I think.
And what do you make of Elon Musk, who is a Pentagon contractor via SpaceX, being handed the authority by Trump to supposedly find waste at the Pentagon, which we all know there is. I mean, the Pentagon can't even pass an audit, but yet the responsibility for uncovering that is going to a guy who makes a lot of money off of his contracts with the Pentagon.
And even more directly, from what I understand, DOGE is going into NASA this week or next week, which is, literally SpaceX's biggest contract or customer. So there does seem to be some pretty obvious conflicts of interest happening there. I think the more interesting question in a way, other than like, is this corruption? Because obviously it is like, what is his end game with this? I mean, obviously, as I said at the top, he's already benefiting greatly from his like close symbiotic relationship with the federal government. So what are you actually going in there to change? You want to get even larger contracts? I think the answer is yes. I think that the weapon system side of the kind of Silicon Valley tech right is not to be underestimated. I think the centrality of Palantir, which if you haven't seen, I recommend watching Alex Karp's earnings call, where he's just like throwing a party. He's like ecstatic about the incoming administration.
Alex Karp of Palantir.
Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir. This is a company that does a lot of things that we actually don't know about, and he says that openly on the call. He says, I love what we're doing, especially the stuff I can't talk about. And sometimes people need to get killed and heads get chopped off, and that's okay. And he has like this sort of beaming expression. And if you look at Palantir's stock price, you would know why, that they're doing extremely well since Trump came into office. And Anduril is another one that's run by Palmer Luckey, another kind of protege of Peter Thiel. The possibilities of merging AI with the military state, I think, for them are endless. So part of the story with Elon Musk, I think, is okay, waste, fraud, and abuse, usual conservative stuff that even lots of Democratic lawmakers get behind. Like there is obviously excessive spending, and certainly, especially in the military part of the state. But then the other side is, how can you sort of more intricately knit together the private interests represented by your own firms, which provide the services, whether they're satellites or rockets or weapon systems, just knit those right into the very functioning of the bureaucracy by replacing people with AI services, for example, which is one thing that Kyle Chaika at the New Yorker has just written a really interesting piece about. So it's an interesting one. I think on the face of it, it's like he's trying to make it more efficient, most obvious impression. Second, slightly more next level one is, he's trying to do a kind of Russell Vought, like permanent hobbling of the state and keeping it out of some parts of social life and accelerating its push into others. But then the third is, kind of trying to create this new sort of AI-enabled tech state that they can use, basically to plug directly into their own prerogatives and wish lists for what government should be funding.
And Wednesday, I believe, Ryan Grimm reported that a State Department procurement document for upcoming contracts for 2025, Musk's Teslas will be awarded a contract to have $400 million worth of armored Tesla vehicles purchased by Rubio's State Department.
Yeah, I mean, in this narrative, the kind of, the attempt by that person to suicide bomb himself in the Cybertruck in Las Vegas ends up being actually a pretty good advertisement for the Cybertruck, because it didn't work. Basically, his bomb didn't leave the walls of the truck. It just went straight out. Yeah, I mean, this is another stark example. And $500 million it's not chump change. I mean, that's a pretty good sized contract. But again, like Palantir and Anduril both had contracts of that size that they signed under the Biden administration in the waning months of that government. So it is one, I think it's sort of like one for the psychoanalysts or something, is like, why, when things are going so well, do they have this need to kind of push it so much further? Is it just like a kind of relentless drive that they have internally for like total monopoly? And I suppose the answer is yes. But, why are they willing to take such risks? Because some part of Musk must be worried at some level about there being some repercussions for the actions he's taking. But on the other hand, if you can like hang out in the Oval Office with your toddler and just kind of like vibe with journalists while the president sits quietly next to you, then maybe you do have a sense of total impunity that is deserved.
And just to clarify something, it is true, and we want to be balanced here, that the State Department contract for Tesla was signed under the Biden administration. So, this isn't like a new thing, but it does speak to the huge power of Musk in a government where he's been given unprecedented control over a whole series of so-called cost-cutting measures. Let me ask you, Quinn, what is your response to people? And I have to admit, I'm sympathetic to this viewpoint. When, okay, yes, we can see all these horrible things going on. The shutting of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for example, to me is such an obvious power grab and an attempt to enrich the ultra wealthy and weaken protection for ordinary people. That's obvious. But when I see neocons whose agenda I personally really despise, complaining about what Musk is doing, for example, with headlines like this in the outlet The Free Press, which is run by Barry Weiss. Exclusive: Trump is starving the National Endowment for Democracy. DOGE has frozen funds to the organization that was instrumental in helping win the Cold War. And then one person there is quoted as saying, it's been a bloodbath. So the NED, which I think has been really destructive around the world, taking part in undermining democracy in the name of endowing democracy, protecting democracy, that they're having their funds cut. And someone there is even complaining that it's a bloodbath, and neocons are upset about this, neocon pundits. NED on their board is someone like Victoria Nuland, who I think has been just catastrophic for the world with her policies everywhere. So when I see that, I think, okay, there are some positive things happening amidst this, oligarch-led bloodbath.
Yeah. I mean, I said this, I think, even before Trump came into office, but you had this sense that, the one sort of pedagogical upside, anyway, of a full-blown attack on the state is it forces you to learn more about what the state actually does. So, when someone comes in and says, we're going to get rid of the Department of Education, then, that's a good learning moment to be like, okay, what actually is funded by the Department of Education? Because actually America has an extremely unequal public education system that's almost totally funded by local property taxes, leading to like vastly different outcomes for people, whether they're in a rich neighborhood or poor neighborhood. So then you figure out, okay, they do a little bit of special education funding, they do some top-up funding, they do some federal grants. So in the process of, scrambling to understand what is being dismantled, you sort of you start to figure out a bit about how the thing actually works. And I think the U.S. empire is similar, where something like USAID becomes a kind of a litmus test for your feelings about the U.S. empire. Do you think it's net good or net bad? And if your heart is broken the moment you hear, the USAID is being defunded, then I think, it's a good moment to sort of pause and say, like, what do you know exactly about how this thing operates? Do you know how it allocates funding to things that you might be behind and might be less behind? How much of it is primary healthcare? How much of it is, political education? And the NED is a good example of that too. We actually don't know what the NED does internally, mostly. I actually have a colleague here at the university who is trying to write a history of it, and he's only gotten so far because at some point, it's supposed to be pushing democracy and openness in the world, and yet it's surprisingly closed-lipped about what it actually is funding and doing internationally. So there is, I think, a kind of, in the post-Second World War and post-communist context, they called it lustration, where you just kind of bring in the light. You kind of open up, you open up the archives and you open up the bureaucratic shelves, and that was a very destructive process in some cases, but it is kind of an enlightening moment as well. So I think it's too soon for me anyway to sort of come down on that and say, well, the more, we'll learn enough that, the net will be positive because, destructive things will have been destroyed. But I think it is kind of a turning point in the kind of automatic consent that incoming governments give to the existing set of relationships that the U.S. has globally. I actually think the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard is pretty startling in that regard too. That was one of the candidates nominees I assumed would not make it through, just because of her kind of pretty pronounced anti-establishment stance, at least rhetorically. So she follows through on that too. We might just end up finding out a lot more of how the U.S. actually operates globally, and then that will at least give us, as citizens of the planet, the grounds on which to judge whether we approve of or disapprove of what they're doing. But right now, most of it happens in secret, and there probably is too much benefit of the doubt that's granted, given what we do know about how the U.S. operates.
And just to clarify, by the way, the thing with the Tesla contract. So there's an update. So the State Department has now revised its spreadsheet to remove Tesla's name, with metadata showing was altered after the drop site article was published. After Rachel Maddow covered the revelation of MSNBC, Musk responded to her, "Why the lie?" He did not specify the alleged lie, but Maddow neglected to mention that the procurement document was produced in December 2024 after Trump's election, but before he took office.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's some evasion happening. I mean, one thing I would say, just like on a kind of a larger point about this, because I think it's an important one, and it's one that I think, the left is just starting to kind of deal with. I spent a lot of time in Europe. My specialty is European history. And as we know, kind of, there's been a more social democratic, left-leaning sort of status quo or consensus in Western Europe since the end of the Cold War compared to the United States. And the fact that Europe has existed and just lived for decades under a U.S. security umbrella is often just a kind of repressed fact of everyday life for Europeans. So when pushed, for example, if you're in Germany and to say, like, you might have to pay for your own defense, then people revolt at that idea. But then if you say, so you like the American empire because you don't want to defend yourself, and yet you also want to criticize American militarism, isn't there a bit of a contradiction there? Like, is there a way out of that? And I think that, one of the upsides, you can say, of this turn in the relationship to the U.S. presence overseas has been, obviously massive hypocrisy and overreach and continued intervention in parts of the world. But especially in Europe, I think it's forced a kind of soul searching about, like, well, what is it that the relationship to the U.S. should be if it no longer takes on the personal, voluntary role as, global hegemon.
Something else I want to ask you about is, and that you've written about, is Elon Musk's interest in population. You wrote about this in the New Statesman, and in particular, who is repopulating. Can you elaborate on this for us?
Sure. Yeah. So this is really funny because he has a huge foundation, the Elon Musk Foundation. By endowment, it's one of the heavy hitters in the United States. But he never actually endows anyone. So he never gives the money to anyone. Therefore, he's misusing actually the tax status, and he gets dinged, from year to year for not actually dispersing any of the funds that you have to have foundation status. One exception is this thing called the Population Wellbeing Initiative at the University of Texas, Austin, which, that intrigued me because it was like, okay, why is this the one thing that you think, your precious private dollars should be, funneled towards? And what it turns out it's basically demographic scientists. And what they're interested in is the kind of medium-term fall in replacement rate fertility across the world. And the fact that quite literally, and according to the OECD and according to everyone who's like a serious non-quack scientist, there is a sort of a secular movement towards a smaller population over the next, century, 2 centuries that is cause for concern in the short term. If you're a politician, for sure, if you're in a place like South Korea or Japan, where the population is aging and there aren't enough young people to take care of them or to pay into the entitlement system that, pays for the welfare state. So there is a kind of serious discussion happening about how to raise fertility rates, whether you can do it through immigration adequately or whether you can do, inducements for families to have larger, more children and to make childcare cheaper and so on. That's been going on for decades. This discussion of like a depopulation bomb is something that people actually take quite seriously. So Musk sort of, as with many things, takes a kind of like a kernel of truth and then, wraps it in like a big woolly ball of like fabrication and fabulation. And one of the things that now he has just become convinced is that like this is going to happen very rapidly. So, for example, when he was talking on the stage in Italy, people asked him whether or not he'd invest in Italy. And he said, no, like there's not going to be enough workers here. You're not going to have any people soon. And the host was like, wait, what do you mean? Like, not right away. And he's like, no, it's happening. It's happening. And he said something like, next generation, the Chinese population will be halved. Or like he's making these ridiculous, exaggerated claims, which become politically important for him. Because at first it's about like this fear of humanity dying off quickly, therefore giving him a new sense of urgency to basically, get to where on his rocket ships. But then recently, now that he's gotten so plugged into kind of ethno-nationalist party politics in Europe, it's become a kind of defense of the German population, the Italian population, the British white population against replacement by incoming immigrants. So that's now his rhetoric. When he speaks to the Alternative for Germany party, he says like, we don't want the German nation to be diluted by multiculturalism. When he speaks to Giorgia Meloni's party in Italy, he says, Italy should be for the Italians. So what had been a kind of species level concern has now become a pretty clearly racially coded national concern and nationalist concern. And that, I think, has helped to kind of, concretize in his mind this defense of those far-right parties that are virulently anti-immigrant and somehow vaguely pro-natalist, wanting their own people to reproduce more. Obviously, the fact that he's produced 12 children himself is, putting, making the political personal, and shows his own attempt to reproduce his own DNA into the future.
Well, one of them must have been a mutant because she's not a big fan of her father.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I think, one of the well-established things now is that his daughter transitioning was one of the things that radicalized him towards the right. And it was after that he started using this idea of the woke mind virus quite frequently and, siding with more culturally conservative parts of the spectrum.
My last question, Steve Bannon has been a prominent MAGA voice to be very vocal in opposition to Elon Musk. Is that is that genuine? Is it performative? And what's it about? And do you see potential there for a real split inside MAGA between like the Bannon wing and the Elon wing? And could we possibly see a MAGA kind of civil war?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think my first impression is just that, it's a battle for Trump's favor and in Trump's ear. And Bannon clearly had that, and Trump won going into 2017. He was the one, I think, at the cockpit of a lot of the first executive orders, the Muslim ban and so on. And seeing himself shunted aside for Elon, I think it just hurts his pride, probably at a personal level. He's, of course, now blown that up into like a full-scale attack on what he calls the kind of techno-feudalists of Silicon Valley who want to bring back or he says that Silicon Valley already is an apartheid state. And so his rhetoric is like turned up really high, but it wouldn't be the first time that he, speaks in those kind of insane terms and then quickly makes a kind of tactical alliance with someone. I mean, if you look at the stuff that Trump himself was saying about RFK, about a year ago, and now he's standing by his side and defending him. So they seem to have an ability to get over their grudges quite quickly if it's politically expedient. And I think that the immigration kerfuffle at the end of 2024 suggested that there's actually ways of actually mollifying both sides of this supposed schism. I think that you just simply can, heal a MAGA civil war by rounding up, poor immigrants of the working class and deporting them, or even, performing these sadistic acts of imprisonment in Guantanamo Bay and so on, at the same time as you, through the back door, kind of keep bringing in H-1B skilled workers from Bangalore or whatever, and keeping them in the apartheid state of Silicon Valley to keep the big investment AI projects and stuff going. So I don't see the grounds for a civil war, because I think you need troops on both sides. And to me right now, who does Bannon sort of head? I mean, the absence of the kind of grassroots insurgencies of the sort of Proud Boys variety, I think, has been pretty interesting this time around, right? Like, we're just not seeing much talk about that, not much presence of the kind of goons in the streets that was such a big part of the first Trump administration into 2020 and 2021, obviously. It seems like the wrecking crews are operating from above this time around. And I think it's clear that Musk has become so much the favorite of Trump at the moment that I think Bannon is just sort of, lamping in the background and waiting for a chance to get close again. I think it's a kind of ecosystem of competition amongst the courtiers and the king that probably has no prospect of turning into a mutiny or anything more extreme. No Janissary revolts on the horizon, as far as I can tell.
Too bad. You write in a piece about 5 core propositions that Elon Musk has, because you say that if we squint through the shitposting and chaos, he seems driven by what we could see as 5 core propositions. So I want to know if you could go over some of those propositions and also talk about how, because he does seem to have a different ideology from Steve Bannon. I mean, from what I can tell, right? Steve Bannon really is a racist populist, whereas Elon Musk is not, doesn't want to help the working class. And again, I'm not a Steve Bannon fan, right? But obviously he does have some more populist economic propositions. I think that in some ways, actually, Elon Musk is less scary, because as long as his corruption is exposed, he's kind of potentially more of a transparent enemy of the people. Whereas with Bannon, I think it's harder to make that case. It's easier to say, no, he cares about the working people. But yeah, can you talk about these 5 propositions of that Elon has?
Yeah, I was trying to kind of break down why I thought that the description of Musk as a libertarian, for example, I think is not that helpful. And I'd even think of him as a techno-fascist, as now people are saying that. I also not sure if that's really getting us anywhere. But the way that I was trying to take apart his philosophy without really having a good name for it yet is, one, I think he's not really anti-state, right? I think he just thinks the state needs to serve the makers, like it needs to serve the productive inventors, as he would see himself and his fellow tech founders. So that's actually kind of more of a developmentalist vision, I think. It's a bit more like the way actually the Saudis and the Emiratis will use their sovereign wealth fund to fund big investments in, hydrogen energy and things of that nature. Singapore building out its tech industry in the 1970s and 80s. The other thing I think is guiding him is this idea that present action is guided by something in the deep future. So one thing you kind of do have to grant him is he plays with timeframes in pretty interesting ways. This is sort of his attraction to science fiction. And video games, I think, kind of work in tandem and against each other. So that's what I said in the piece, is I think that he has this language of centuries and millennia that mean we need to just get to become a multiplanetary civilization before things crack up here on Earth, which suggests a kind of decades type time frame. But then, he's also like really into playing these dungeon crawling Diablo 4 type games that are just like all about split second reactions and like killing the enemy around the corner, which suggests also like this really frenetic, anxious, short time frame. So what neither of them are is like the 2-year election cycle, right? They're either like it needs to happen now, or it needs to happen now because it's about something that happens in 100 years. So I think that is that's can kind of hack a lot of the usual political expectations. The other thing I said is that I think he believes that online politics have killed old politics. So, and there he's not totally wrong, right? I mean, the parties like UKIP and Five Star and then the Lega and the AfD in Germany have made really effective use of digital platforms to totally outflank the legacy parties and create big constituencies sort of overnight, come up with sort of charismatic influencers. And I think Elon Musk is really attracted to that as a sort of online entity himself. And he's trying to find the kind of Teslas of politics out in the world who he can then back, because he assumes that, the old parties, the Labour Party, the SPD, CDU are going the way of the Dodo, they're going the way of the Chevrolet. So you need to get behind the newest, hottest, most shiny new object. And, there you kind of do got to hand it to him. Like there is something to that. There is that dynamic is at work. It's just been monopolized by the right in recent years. The last thing I guess that I remember talking about was that there are just it's kind of a version of techno solutionism. Like I think there are just technical fixes for all problems of governance. Like the idea that part of solving problems as a society would be like deliberation or like contestation and debate, and like out of debate comes, a compromise that people can live with, is I think just foreign to his way of thinking. He has like a managerial mindset and a technological mindset, which is like if there's a problem, it's like a kink in the assembly line, and we just need to like tear out that part or like streamline that gesture, that procedure. And so I think it's like a very asocial way of thinking about what government is. And it's clearly what he's, bringing into the halls of government right now with the DOGE project, with likely catastrophic consequences. So I don't think, that's another way of saying that is I don't think we have to sort of defend all projects of the American government to be skeptical about the approach that someone like Musk is taking. I think that he's not really attacking this or that program in the end. I think he's attacking a whole logic of what government should be. So government should not be something that, filters out people's diverse preferences and then finds some sort of common version that can win consent. It should just be like a mission-driven thing with top-down directions that operates according to, the code that's been injected in it. And I think that is the stuff that really scares me about the way he's rethinking the state.
Well, of course, as usual, I think like pretending that this is all free market, as so many people do.
Maybe, but I think that's also why he's interesting. I think in a way, he also doesn't care about the market. That's why the Peter Thiel thing, like competition is for losers. Every corporation wants to be a monopoly. I think this is an extension of that. Musk thinks that the state is a corporation. It's just a poorly run one. And he doesn't actually believe in a free market, even in the normal neoliberal way. Like you should have multiple service providers that you can choose from. He just thinks like we need to do it, make it work best, and then, force compliance and participation.
Well, thank you so much for your insights into this scary figure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Thanks, Quinn, so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Very good to talk to Quinn Slobodian. Again, his book is called Crack Up Capitalism, Market Radicals and the Dream of a World Without Democracy. His forthcoming book is Hayek's Bastards, Race, Gold, IQ, and the Capitalism of the Far Right. And up next, we have independent journalist Michael Tracey. He writes at mtracy.net. And we'll hear from Michael on many topics, including the war in Ukraine. Is Trump really going to bring it to an end? This is Michael Tracey. Michael Tracey, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
One of the big news items of this week is Trump announcing that he's spoken to Vladimir Putin. This is the first time that a U.S. president has spoken to Putin in many years, because the Biden administration basically refused to do any diplomacy. And Trump is saying he's going to end the war. This coincided with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declaring that the U.S. does not believe that Ukraine should join NATO and that Ukraine's territorial goals are unrealistic. Do you see a big shift here? You've been very critical of the Trump administration in terms of its policies, especially in terms of warmongering. But do you see anything significant in these moves by Trump?
Yeah, I mean, whatever else happens, the initiation of direct contacts or the resumption of direct contacts between the U.S. president and the president of the Russian Federation is unto itself significant, because, as I don't have to tell you, these are the countries with the world's largest nuclear arsenals. So the idea that for 3 years, those contacts were essentially frozen, that we know of. I mean, maybe, in a decade or two, some revelation will come out that there was some exchange that was had, but at least in terms of what's been publicly disclosed, there's been no contact for nearly 3 years, or almost exactly 3 years. So to change that equilibrium just is unto itself significant. But what I'm looking at most closely, it's not just the public rhetoric, granting that it's significant that there's some communication happening. It's the underlying policy. I mean, you can have all the communications that you want, but if it doesn't comport with some sort of underlying substantive policy shift, then it's kind of just window dressing. I don't know that that's going to be the case. I mean, we're all told we need to reread The Art of the Deal because it's like the new Torah or something, and it has all this ancient wisdom in it. And so, for example, like, we're supposed to understand that the art of the deal explains why the U.S. should seize Gaza as some kind of new military protectorate. And I guess the art of the deal also is supposed to illuminate to us why U.S. aid is apparently continuing to Ukraine. Now, the administration officials haven't spelled out with much precision yet what that aid will supposedly consist of. But, for all the boisterous headlines yesterday, when news of this Trump-Putin phone call was announced, Trump dispatched, for the first time, a top administration official to Ukraine in the second term, and it was Scott Bessent, who's the new Treasury Secretary. And he explicitly said that in exchange for Ukraine acceding to this new economic cooperation agreement, which apparently will entail the U.S. having a claim to rare earth mineral deposits in Ukraine, the U.S. will continue to provide what Bessent called material support.
We would like an economic cooperation agreement, and in exchange for this agreement, the U.S. will continue to provide material support for the Ukraine, for the people, and we believe that this agreement will be a strong signal to Russian leadership of the U.S. commitment that we have here, and we think it will be a strong signal to the American people that the money that is coming to Ukraine, we have shared values, we have shared security, and we look to increase our shared economic commitment.
Can I just note that he keeps saying the Ukraine, which I wonder if he'll get in trouble for with Ukrainians and Ukraine allies.
Yeah, they don't like that because it's like an invocation of Soviet times or something.
Exactly. Well, maybe he's a KGB spy, like Donald Trump is, apparently.
Anyway, so I'm not going to deny the significance of the U.S. president and the president of the Russian Federation resuming direct contacts, because the past 3 years have really been a historical anomaly, even in some of the most tense days of the Cold War. the U.S. President and the head of the Soviet Union didn't totally reject the idea of maintaining communications, that would have been almost inconceivable. And I recall in October of 2022 when Biden went to a Democratic fundraiser and said, "Oh, by the way, folks, we currently face the most severe nuclear risk since the Cuban Missile Crisis, but for some reason that doesn't necessitate any outreach to the country with which we would be going to nuclear war if that risk came to fruition." That was totally absurd. So I'm granting that. However, assuming that Bessent is not just freelancing, and I don't see any reason why that would be the case, right? I mean, that was the explanation I got from like MAGA people on the internet. Oh, Scott Bessent, the new Treasury Secretary who Trump dispatched to Ukraine, didn't get the memo about what the policy is. That doesn't seem plausible to me.
You've had that argument. You've had that argument with MAGA people, like I feel like a million times, where like you'll criticize some member of the Trump camp, and then someone will respond to you saying, "Well, they're undermining Trump. He doesn't know," and then you'll explain to
Trump is always being like sabotaged by nefarious interlopers who are just perpetually surrounding him.
Yeah. Which doesn't that make him like stupid or naive? Isn't that something that MAGA people would not want to say either?
Well, I mean, now they have the whole, that mentality somehow seems to concede by their logic that the first term was a failure because although Trump ran in 2016 saying he was going to hire all the best people, he screwed that up because he was just too naive about the ways of Washington. Right. But now that he's a Washington expert and he's been immersed there for a decade, he knows who to hire and fire. And yet, I don't know, he still hired a Treasury Secretary who is like sabotaging the administration's policy.
He now has Swampdar. He's developed Swampdar.
Yeah. But then so Bessent says that the US and Ukraine have shared values, whatever that means, and shared security interests, whatever that means. So I thought the whole debate over the past couple of years was skepticism that the U.S. that really does have security interests that are so intertwined with those of Ukraine. And in fact, it was Russia, given their geographic proximity and cultural ties, which more squarely had those alleged security interests vis-a-vis Ukraine. But I don't know. That's just a repetition. I mean, Aaron, did you hear much there that would be out of place with the vast majority of what the Biden administration had said? The only thing that is new that I can see yet is that Trump and the administration, they want some additional form of compensation from Ukraine by virtue of this mineral extraction plan, which was actually floated initially, if you recall, by Lindsey Graham last year, who was trying to like tailor his preferences on Ukraine policy to what he thought would most resonate with Trump. And lo and behold, that's what's been adopted apparently as the policy.
Well, but you also have the factor of Trump being asked the other day at the White House, is Ukraine an equal partner? And he wouldn't say yes. He said, that's an interesting question. So, I mean, one possibility is that simply Ukraine just gets told what to do, including handing over to the U.S. its natural resources, and Trump offering some incentive to Ukraine, but nowhere near what Ukraine wants. But Ukraine having little other choice because it's so now dependent on the U.S. And I guess for me, the main question is, will Trump, despite these promises of continued assistance from people like Pete Hegseth and the Treasury Secretary there, will Trump go before Congress and ask for tens of billions of dollars more in war funding? That's what Biden did multiple times. He got, all the Democrats on board with that and a lot of Republicans. Is Trump, after campaigning on this pledge to end the war, after criticizing sometimes how much money we're spending on the war, he's still doing that. Is he actually going to go before Congress and make that request? And I just somehow don't see him doing that. Now, you've pointed out accurately that in the last round of major congressional allocation for the proxy war, it was Trump who got it over the finish line. That Trump basically told Mike Johnson to let it pass, and that helped Biden win more than $60 billion in proxy war funding. So,
I always said that when the those long range missiles were striking deep inside Russian territory, they should have emblazoned with the gold Trump letters as well as Biden's signature to showcase the bipartisan harmony that led to those appropriations being passed. And yeah, I mean, I know what you mean, that it's hard to believe that Trump will actually go before Congress and request additional funds, but he's done it before in an underhanded way, in a way that wasn't really adequately covered, both by the mainstream press, which still was tethered to this ridiculous narrative of him being in hock to Putin or sympathizing with Russia's interests, and also in like the right-wing ass-kissing media complex, which just like wanted to believe that Trump was opposed to the Ukraine policy despite a huge bevy of evidence. So it's happened before. We don't have to recount here because you both know that Trump was the one who first started arming Ukraine to begin with. So would it be that out of place in terms of what his policy record is? And he did say yesterday, like, it's not just these rogue administration officials speaking out of school. Trump was asked point blank yesterday, it sounded like potentially by a Ukrainian journalist or somebody with some sort of slightly exotic accent, who said, so are you saying that aid to Ukraine will not continue? He said, no, it's going to continue. We just want our money for it. So we just want this economic cooperation agreement, quote unquote. So if he can go to Congress and present some potential request for additional funding as pursuant to his negotiations or pursuant to, quote, ending the war, which is really just a mantra or a slogan. I mean, everybody in theory claims that they want to end wars. Like Netanyahu says he wants to end the war in Gaza. Putin has always said that he would like to end the war in Ukraine. So is Zelensky. So did even Biden and Blinken to some degree. So sometimes you got to dig a little bit deeper than just like the public pronouncements, which everybody kind of likes to hear. I mean, very rarely does a politician go before the voting public and say, you know what I really would like to do? Continue a war or start a war. No, they always kind of frame it as some kind of peacemaking initiative, even if the underlying policy is totally divorced from that. So I think that's what people should be cognizant of.
In the same way that they say, like, America first in defense of arming Israel to the teeth. Like, they can come up with any kind of rhetorical.
Yeah. These are just slogans. Everybody in the Republican Party, no matter what ideological tendency they represent, purports now to be an adherent to America first, which doesn't really mean much in practice other than they've grafted it on to their pre-existing policy initiatives. I mean, Zelensky's actually shrewd in that since the election, and even a little bit before when it was, probably likely that Trump would win, Zelensky started adopting this slogan of peace through strength. He's saying, we understand that Donald Trump wants to put America first. So here, let us help you do that. He's saying, let us help give Trump a big win. So he's like adopting this more transactionalist framework rather than, the obnoxious, highfalutin, values-based framework that maybe would have been more resonant with the Democratic administration. So yeah, these rhetorical flourishes are all extremely malleable, which is why I think it's usually pretty prudent to look to the underlying policy to compare it and contrast it with what the rhetorical overlay might be.
It also reminds me of those war games, the war games to prevent war that Congress likes to play.
Oh yeah, they love to do that. They love to claim, like I saw them touting one with Taiwan at a Stratcom symposium. So Stratcom is the branch of the military that runs the U.S. nuclear arsenal, essentially. And so at the latest symposiums, they've been showcasing these war games that they're running to game out, quote unquote, because it's all a game, the scenario in which the PRC, China invades Taiwan, and how many times out of 100 or 1,000 or like 1,000,000 simulations the U.S. because it's obviously going to intervene in that eventuality, would emerge triumphant. So it creates this air of inevitability around potential U.S. military interventions because they've already gamed out the scenario. So like they're operating from a framework where it's already conceivable to them, or it's already like it's not particularly shocking or foreign to them that this conflict could break out. And another irony is that they will frame it in terms of deterrence. So they're deterring an outcome that they're actively planning for and are probably contributing to the instigation of, because they're going to deter the war by militarizing Taiwan in this case, and basically, hectoring China to test out American and Taiwanese resolve to fend off this invasion. So yeah, there's euphemism layered on top of euphemism when you talk about foreign policy stuff in this vein.
Speaking of foreign policy, I wanted you to react to a clip that we have of Trump at Davos in January talking about military spending and NATO military spending in particular.
I'm also going to ask all NATO nations to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, which is what it should have been years ago. It was only at 2%, and most nations didn't pay until I came along. I insisted that they pay, and they did, because the United States was really paying the difference at that time, and it was unfair to the United States.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fallacy around Trump that's driven me crazy for years. And it's another instance where both the mainstream narrative, if you want to call it that, and then the more sycophantic kind of right-wing media narrative, they both collide and devolve into absurdity because neither are accurate. There are people maybe on the non-interventionist or quote-unquote anti-establishment right who really don't like NATO, would hope for Trump to be some genuine antagonist toward NATO, or even undermine it, dissolve it, something like that. And likewise, the conventional mainstream narrative for years now has been that Trump is secretly, deviously trying to undermine NATO because he wants to give a gift to Putin or whatnot. And I'm sorry, demanding that European member states spend now 5% on GDP, which is an enormous, astronomical increase compared to what previously the standard had been, which was 2%. And since 2022, a lot of European member states have radically increased their spending, although apparently not to the satisfaction of people in the US like Trump. Nothing could bolster NATO more than that. Because Trump isn't saying we have to pair this with any real reduction in U.S. military spending. In fact, when he gave his Super Bowl interview on Fox News, he said something that was very consistent with his first term, which is that we need to increase defense spending. So that's apparently immunized from this DOGE initiative where we have to reduce spending in like regulating the credit card companies, or we have to neuter any attempt to rein in like the financial industry, but just for cost saving reasons. But we're going to couple that with increasing the defense budget, which it shouldn't be surprising. I mean, Trump did this, Biden did this, now Trump is doing it again. But in terms of the status of NATO, increasing U.S. defense spending and trying to pressure European NATO states into like doubling or quadrupling or quintupling their own defense spending, I just don't see how that is any kind of threat to the viability of NATO. In fact, it's making it an even more formidable tool of American hegemonic power, right?
And last thing I want to say about Russia, Ukraine, NATO before we move on to other topics. I mean, the question for me also, which doesn't really get posed very much, is what will Russia accept? And is Russia going to accept some kind of deal that doesn't address the sort of broader security concerns it has, which it tried to address before it invaded, which includes, rolling back the NATO military infrastructure surrounding Russia. And for example, the U.S. taking down these so-called missile defense sites in Poland and Romania. And Trump, even if he doesn't go and ask Congress for more money for the Ukraine proxy war, and I'll grant you, I mean, you made a very good case for why you could see him totally doing that under the guise of ending the war. But is Trump really going to do anything that undermines U.S. hegemony, like rolling back NATO and reaching some broader security pact with Russia, especially given his record of tearing up the INF Treaty, a really important arms control pact that everybody ignored because they were so obsessed with Russiagate at the time? I just don't see Trump doing any of that.
And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiotspodcast.com.
And that was Michael Tracey. Make sure that you subscribe to usefulidiotspodcast.com to hear the entire interview, because it gets kind of spicy. Would you say, Aaron? Medium?
I mean, I don't use the term spicy usually, but because I just associate it with, remember when AOC was like going after Jill Stein and she was like, this is about to get spicy.
Oh, you're right. Oh my God.
Ever since then, yeah, it's
right.
one of the many words that I boycott, but certainly Michael's got a lot to say about the Trump administration and how it's kind of led both its supporters and detractors to believe as if it's taking on a neocon foreign policy while really not changing all that much. And we'll hear also Michael's thoughts about Tulsi Gabbard, who's just been confirmed as Director of National Intelligence. And Michael has covered Tulsi extensively, has defended her against a lot of the smear tactics that were thrown her way, but still has some very pointed criticisms of her, especially since she's joined the MAGA camp to now become the nation's top intelligence chief. And so we have a discussion about that and a lot more. You can get that at usefulidiotspodcast.com.
And the culture wars, we talk about that too.
All right, that's our show. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiotspodcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.